This is TWiT.
Ripples in the space-time continuum. The rhetorical question is, just how much damage can a little two-person company situated in Cincinnati, Ohio, do to the world? The answer to that question was likely revised this week. The company is TREC, T-R-E-C-K, Inc. They've got a very up-to-date looking website at https://trek.com. The site's homepage declares, since 1997, so 23 years, TREC has been designing, distributing, and supporting real-time embedded internet protocols for worldwide technology leaders. What could possibly go wrong? No, it doesn't say that. They said the TREC TCP/IP stack designer and TREC co-founder has more than 20 years experience and is a leading expert in embedded internet protocols. Well, as we know, anyone can be forgiven for making a mistake. And arguably, someone should probably have given a good hard look at these offerings before allowing 23 years of embedded device adoption to have occurred. But now is when we are. And as the Hacker News summed it up in their headline, new Ripple20 flaws put billions, with a B, of internet-connected devices at risk of hacking. The Hacker News wrote at the top of their coverage, dubbed Ripple20, the set of 19 vulnerabilities resides in a low-level TCP/IP software library developed by TREC, which, if weaponized, could let remote attackers gain complete control over targeted devices without requiring any user interaction. According to Israeli cybersecurity company JSOF, which I'll just be saying as JSOF, who discovered these flaws, the affected devices are in use across various industries ranging from home consumer devices to medical, healthcare, data centers, enterprises, telecom, oil, gas, nuclear, transportation, and many others across critical infrastructure. So switching to JSOF's summary and to get some additional details, they said the JSOF Research Lab has discovered a series of zero-day vulnerabilities in a widely used low-level TCP/IP software library developed by TREC Inc. The 19 vulnerabilities, given the name Ripple20, affect hundreds of millions of devices or more and include multiple remote code execution vulnerabilities. The risks inherent in this situation are high. Just a few examples, they say. Data could be stolen from a printer. An infusion pump's behavior could be changed. Or industrial control devices could be made to malfunction. An attacker could hide malicious code within embedded devices for years. One of the vulnerabilities could enable entry from outside into the network boundaries, and this is only, they said, a small taste of potential risks. The interesting thing about Ripple20, they wrote, is the incredible extent of its impact, magnified by the supply chain factor. The widespread dissemination of the software library and its internal vulnerabilities was a natural consequence of the supply chain's ripple effect. A single vulnerable component, though it may be relatively small in and of itself, can ripple outward to impact a wide range of industries, applications, companies, and people. Ripple20 reached critical IoT devices from a wide range of fields involving a diverse group of vendors. affected vendors range from one-person boutique shops to Fortune 500 multinational corporations, including Cisco, HP, EMC, GE, Broadcom, NVIDIA, Schneider Electric, Intel, Rockwell Automation, Caterpillar, Baxter, as well as many other major international vendors suspected of being vulnerable in medical, transportation, industrial control, enterprise, energy, oil and gas, telecom, retail, and commerce, and other industries. They said Ripple20 is a set of vulnerabilities found on the TREC TCP/IP stack. 4 of the Ripple20 vulnerabilities are rated critical, with CVSS scores over 9 and enabling remote code execution. One of the critical vulnerabilities is in the DNS protocol and may potentially be exploitable by a sophisticated hacker over the internet from outside the network boundaries, even on devices that are not connected to the internet. A second white paper to be released, because I looked at their first white paper, to be released following Black Hat USA 2020. So this is again a pre-Black Hat presentation announcement. Will be detailing the exploitation of CVE 2020-11901, a DNS vulnerability on a Schneider Electric ACP UPS device. They turn it off remotely with no authentication required. The other 15 vulnerabilities are in ranging degrees of severity, with CVSS scores ranging from 3.1 up to 8.2, and effects ranging from denial of service of the device to potential remote code execution. Most of the vulnerabilities are true 0 days, with 4 of them having been closed over the years as part of routine code changes, but remained open in some of the affected devices. 3 were lower severity, 1 was higher. Many of the vulnerabilities have several variants due to the stack configurability, that is the TCP/IP stack configurability, which things were included and which were not, and code changes over the years. Ripple20 are the only vulnerabilities reported in as far as we know. In other words, nobody ever looked before, except for some general logical vulnerabilities referenced in the past, which pertain to many stack implementations and usually had to do with RFC misinterpretations or deprecated RFCs. So just, standards spec things. They said Ripple20 vulnerabilities are unique, both in their widespread effect and impact due to supply chain effect, and being vulnerabilities allowing attackers to bypass NAT and firewalls and take control of devices undetected with no user interaction required. This is due to the vulnerabilities being in a low-level TCP/IP stack, meaning also in the kernel, and the fact that for many of the vulnerabilities, the packets sent are very similar to valid packets, or in some cases are completely valid. And in fact, I looked at the first white paper where they fragment a DNS packet, and it's completely valid, but it causes a buffer overflow that allows you to inject your own code into any of these devices. This enables, they wrote, the attack to pass as legitimate traffic, because it is. So, to give some sense for what has just happened, I have the top 6 vulnerabilities with the highest severities rated from 10 down to 9. And of course, 9 is still house on fire. So the number 1 most severe vulnerability, the one I referenced, has a and this is a CVE 2020-11896, and this is from the formal CVE severity scoring. This is not these guys pumping this up. This has a severity score of 10.0, right, on a scale of 1 to 10. Improper handling of length parameter inconsistency in IPv4 UDP component, that's DNS, when handling a packet sent by an unauthorized network attacker. This vulnerability may result in remote code execution. And I'll just tell everybody that you fragment a UDP, a DNS packet, and you get to run code on these devices. Also, 10.0, improper handling of length parameter inconsistency in IPv6 component when handling a packet sent by an unauthorized network attacker. This vulnerability may result in possible out-of-bounds write. So you get to write over areas that you're not supposed to. Again, executing code. 9.8, improper handling of length parameter, and so forth. Anyway, there's 19 of these, and anytime you see improper handling of length parameter, it's very much like the problem we just talked about in the web server in the 79 Netgear firmware instances, where you're able to provide the length. It is the case that reassembly of fragmented packets is fraught with problems. I don't know why, but it is in the old days, that was a constant source of errors. And these guys at Trek made the errors. And unfortunately, their code has been widely adopted. It's written in C. They advertise that it runs on everything, any microprocessor, any embedded platform, with or without an underlying operating system, on an RTOS or not. You know, I mean, it's like everybody's answer. And it's probably affordable, so it got widely adopted. And now billions of devices have it, and as will be detailed at Black Hat, further detailed, are, you know, insecure. JSOF attempted to be as responsible as possible. They said that their disclosure had been postponed twice as pleas for more time came from some of the many vendors that they were able to determine were affected. And of course, they have limited surveillance abilities, with some of the vendors voicing COVID-19 related delays for the reason they weren't able to act more quickly. So out of consideration for those companies, the time period was extended from 90 to over 120 days. And even so, some of the participating companies became, they wrote, difficult to deal with as they made extra demands, and some, from their perspective, seemed much more concerned with their brand's image than with patching the vulnerabilities. In other words, they wanted to be, you know, not mentioned as being, you know, like they were a company or their stuff was vulnerable. So we know today that hundreds of millions, in the best case, of affected devices scattered all across the globe will almost certainly never receive security patch updates to address these critical Ripple20 vulnerabilities. We are truly in, probably looking to into the future, a world of hurt. You know, and in some despair and not knowing what else to recommend, ICS CERT recommended consumers and organizations, they had 2 bullet points: minimize network exposure for all control system devices and or systems, and ensure that they are not accessible from the internet. You know, unfortunately, their job may be to be accessible from the internet. Locate control systems, networks, and remote devices behind firewalls. Unfortunately, that won't be effective, and isolate them from the business network. And then they said, besides this, it's also advised to use virtual private networks for securely connecting your devices to cloud-based services over that network, which again, may not be at all practical due to the nature, the embedded nature of these things. So, you know, we talked last week about the dangers inherent in having a technological monoculture. You know, at that point, we were talking about Chromium and the Blaze browser, I think. And of course, they'd switched to Chromium too. Here, we have a highly defective, very vulnerable TCP/IP networking library that has been on the market for more than 20 years, more than 2 decades. It is riddled with just discovered critical vulnerabilities of varying degrees of severity from 10.0, many of them, down. And there is just no way to update most of the affected devices. For those that are recently released, that are still in a maintenance contract or a maintenance loop, maybe they've got self-updating facilities, but lots of embedded things don't. We have said till we're blue in the face how crucial it is that anything that is connecting these days have a means of updating itself, because that's the only way to get the job done. And most users will, who are not listening to this podcast, will never even be aware that anything like this has happened. And even those of us who are privy to this podcast may not know what TCP/IP stack random embedded things have. Do our netcams have that? Maybe, probably, maybe not. Who knows? I mean, this is an internal library compiled into the ROM in these devices. They may not even be updatable at that level. And yet, all of these networks and the network security we're all depending upon has arguably just taken probably a noticeable hit. And you can absolutely bet that state level and other hackers for hire are rubbing their hands together. And I'm sure that lists of affected hardware is being assembled at the moment. And it may be that people will just send test pings or test UDP, fragmented UDP at stuff and see if it crashes. If it does, it's probably got this Trek firmware down in its internals. It's the internet is already a target-rich environment, and it just got a whole lot richer.
It's interesting that a number of these vulnerabilities are mishandling of length variables,
yes.
And others are not sanitizing input. It's almost the same problem as with the netgears.
Yep, classic.
How did this go undetected for so long?
Yeah,
it's not open source. That's part of the problem, right? So nobody.
Correct.
And it's embedded, so probably nobody was testing it.
I think that it worked. I mean, right. and that's just it. Some engineer somewhere said, "Oh, look, this, it works," and I'm done. My problem has been solved because my boss said we needed to hook this to the internet.
Gosh.
So, yay!
Golly, just amazing!
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, there we go. Once again, you've made me all excited about the future of the internet. This one's not going to get fixed, period.
No, it's
These
not.
Are embedded devices.
It's everywhere. It's too widespread. It's in our printers and in our light bulbs.
Wow. Now, you mentioned using a VPN to connect your IoT devices.
Well, no, that was just CERT saying.
That's a good idea either.
Yeah, that's right. Put your light bulb on a VPN. That'll work.
No. All right. Oh, how depressing is this? What could you do? What would the mitigation be? Since we don't know which of our many, many, many devices with embedded TCP stacks are vulnerable.
The only practical thing you could do would be to create a purpose-specific filter like in a router. So if your router would have to be trained about never accepting fragmented UDP. There have been other UDP fragmentation attacks, and there you could argue that there isn't a good reason for UDP to be fragmented nearly as much as it once was. So you could just say drop any UDP packet with the frag bit set in its header. And so that would immediately protect you from some of these vulnerabilities. And so you could go through and carefully develop. And I imagine that some of the big IDS vendor guys are probably going to do that. They're going to add filters to to protect their clients' internal networks from anybody sending this stuff from the outside. But as the device just raw plugged into the internet, I don't think there's any way to, it's just not going to get its firmware updated.